In this movie, we'll lend our artwork a sense of depth by adding some soft glows and shadows around the cubes. Now, the first step is going to be to add a gradient background. So I'll press Control minus or Command minus on the Mac to zoom out. And then I'll click on the guides layer to make it active, and I'll drop down to the little page icon at the bottom of the layers panel, and I will Alt or Option click on it to force the display of the layer options dialog box, and I'll call this guy Gradient, and then change the color to grass green. And the reason I go with these colors versus the initial ones, by the way, is I think these first colors are really ugly, and these later colors are more interesting and stand out from each other better. All right, so having done that, I'll click OK. And now I'll grab the rectangle tool, which of course you can get by pressing the M key, and I need my Smart Guides back on, so I'll go up to the View menu and choose the Smart Guides command, and then I'll go ahead and drag from one corner of this red bleed outline to the other one in order to create a massive rectangle like so. Now, I don't need a stroke, so I'll click on the second swatch icon up here in the control panel, and I'll change it to none. And then I'll go over to the swatches panel and make sure that my fill is active, which it is, in the top left corner there. And then you want to bring up the gradient panel by going to the window menu and choosing the gradient command. And now, assuming that you're working with my swatches, go ahead and grab the darkness swatch, which is actually a very dark shade of brown, and drag it and drop it to the end of that gradient bar right there. And then grab the gold swatch and drag it and drop it to the beginning of the bar. All right, now I'll make my gradient panel bigger by clicking on that double arrow icon next to the word gradient, and then I'll change the type to radial. And now what we need to do is expand the gradient by switching to the gradient tool, which you can get by pressing the G key. And I want to go ahead and rotate this guy. So I'll position my cursor right here at the end of the gradient, so I get a little rotate cursor, and then I'll drag all the way up so that my cursor is right there above the top right corner. Now, you're not going to get a snap, even though your Smart Guides are turned on, so you'll just have to eyeball it. And then you want to extend that gradient as well, so go ahead and drag that square end of it all the way to the top right corner, like so. All right, that takes care of that, so I'll go ahead and press the V key to switch back to my black arrow tool, and I'll just go ahead and switch to the stroke panel in order to give myself a little more room, and I'll lock down that gradient layer by clicking in the second column. All right, now I'll go ahead and press Control plus or Command plus on the Mac to zoom in, at which point we're now ready to add some glows and shadows. And we're going to be doing so using a single effect known as outer glow. And so I'll start by clicking on this outer group of purple cubes. And even though it looks like everything's selected, it's really just the purple cubes and nothing more. And that's because there's all these cubes in the background right there. All right, I'll press Control-Z or Command-Z on the Mac to undo that move. And just so I can see what I'm doing a little better, I'll press Control-H or Command-H on the Mac to hide the anchor points. And then I'll go up to the View menu, choose Stylize, and choose Outer Glow. Now, we just so happen to be looking at the settings that I want to apply, but let me show you how I got them. You first want to click on this color swatch right there, and then dial in a shade of yellow, and you can see that it's got a hue of 39 degrees, a saturation of 100%, and a brightness of 89%. But if you have my swatches, then you can click on the Color Swatches button, and then locate the gold swatch, which will be way at the bottom of the stack. And then click OK. Now change the mode to Screen, which is going to uniformly brighten the image, which is why Screen is the default blend mode for the outer glow effect. Next, I set the opacity to 50% and the blur to 33 points, at which point you can turn on a preview checkbox. So here's the idea. If you were to crank up the opacity value, you'd get more glow. And if you were to crank up the blur value, you'd make it bigger, like so. But we don't really want that. And we don't want something dinky either, because in my opinion, that looks terrible. So I'm going to set the blur value to 33 points, just easy to enter. And then I set the opacity value to 50% in order to dial things back a little bit. At which point you can click OK to accept that effect. And once again, that is a dynamic effect that you can change anytime you like by switching over to the appearance panel there. And notice we now have an outer glow assigned to that group. All you have to do is click on the words outer glow and make any modifications you like. Anyway, I'm going to cancel out because I like what I have. And now I'll press Control-H or Command-H on the Mac to bring back my anchor points, just so I can better see what I'm doing for the next step, which is to either deselect the purple cubes and then select the blue, green, and red ones, or in my case, I can just go up to the Select menu and choose the Inverse command in order to deselect what's selected and select what's not, which ends up producing the same effect. All right, now that I've confirmed that everything's the way I want it to be, I'll press Control-H or Command-H on the Mac in order to hide those selection edges. And notice how things keep flashing here when I hover over the outer glow. That is a function of Smart Guides, which is why I'm going to turn them off by pressing Control-U or Command-U on the Mac. And then I'll go up to the Effect menu, and notice you're going to see two instances of outer glow up here at the top of the menu. And that's because the Effect menu is always trying to show you your last applied dynamic effect. And the reason we have two variations is because if you choose the first one, you're just going to reapply the exact settings you applied before. So we now have glows around all of our cubes. That's not what I want, so I'll press Control-Z or Command-Z on the Mac. What I want to do is repeat the effect with different settings. So I'm going to choose the second command, which ends with an ellipsis, ... indicating that we're going to have a conversation in the form of this dialog box. Now, this time around, I want a shadow effect. So I'm going to select a dark color by clicking on that color swatch right there. And then I'll switch to my color swatches and select darkness this time around. And if you're wondering what that looks like, I'll just go ahead and click on color models so that you can see that I've got a hue value of just 8 degrees, a saturation of 100%, and a brightness of 9%. At which point I'll click OK. And notice if I turn the preview checkbox on, I'm not really seeing anything. And that's because I'm trying to screen with a very dark color. In other words, I'm using an exceedingly dark color in order to light my scene. And it's really like I'm shining a flashlight onto the scene, but I've gone and painted the bulb dark brown, which is not going to work. What I want to do instead is use that darkness in order to darken a scene, which is why I'm going to change the blend mode from screen to its opposite, which happens to be multiply, which is the reason it's the default effect for shadows inside Illustrator. And that does give me a shadow effect, and I'm going to make it darker by increasing the opacity value. Keep your eye on the document window to 100%, and then I'll press the Tab key, and you can see how that darkens things significantly. Now, I no longer want this giant blur value, so I'll take it down to just 10 points like so, and we end up with these smaller but darker shadows, at which point I'll click OK in order to accept that effect. All right, now I'm going to press Control-H or Command-H to bring back my anchor points, and I'll press Control-Shift-A or Command-Shift-A on the Mac to deselect my artwork. All right, now at this point you're wondering why in the world I used outer glow instead of drop shadow in order to create my shadow effects. The reason is that drop shadow is a directional effect, so in other words, it goes at an angle, whereas inner glow, which goes inside, and outer glow, which goes outside, are both omnidirectional effects, meaning that they're uniform all the way around your shapes. And that's how you impart depth in your scene, by adding soft glows and shadows using an outer glow effect here inside Illustrator.